campaign is a complete rag. There are other marketing publications. It's just a magazine for self-regarders, isn't it, really? But you've got other marketing publications that I think...
Welcome to episode 24 of Rockstar CMO FM. The M is for marketing, the F is for you decide. As you're probably asking yourself, does the world need another effing marketing podcast? I'm your host, Ian Truscott, founding editor of Rockstar CMO, your monthly dose of marketing street knowledge. You can find us at rockstarcmo.com or at Rockstar CMO on Twitter and LinkedIn. This episode was recorded on Friday the 21st of August, and I'm very glad you're here. Hope you've had a good week, that you're staying safe, well, and as sane as you feel you need to be. If you're a regular listener, thank you and welcome back. If it's your first time, thank you for giving us a go. If you like what you hear, please drop us a rating or a review, or maybe you have a suggestion on a topic or someone we should chat to. I'd love to hear from you. I'm sticking to the usual set list. In a moment, I'll suggest an article from Rockstar CMO that I'd like you to take a look at. We hear the second part of my conversation with Phil Lewis, founder and principal at Corporate Punk, a management consultancy that isn't. And we continue to chat about why the CMO doesn't make it to CEO. And I retire to the virtual Rockstar CMO bar with my friend and content marketing guru, Robert Rose. Let's get started, shall we? You're probably familiar with Mark Schaefer. He's a marketing author, speaker, and consultant, and his blog called Business Grow. If you've not seen it, it's at businessgrow.com. I recently came across an article of his that talks about his experience of catching coronavirus and how, as he describes it, his personal brand saved him. Not from the virus, sadly he was ill for weeks, but how since he has recovered, his business has bounced back better than ever, and he attributes that to his personal brand. It's a great post, and of course I'll include a link to it in the show notes. It leads me to the article I'm plucking out of the virtual pages of Rockstar CMO this week. The article is by Jane Scandura, who regular listeners might remember I've had on the show, who back in the Club Classics Volume 1 issue wrote about the importance of nurturing your personal brand as the pandemic gripped us. If Mark's article makes the case for having a personal brand, Jane's article gives us 3 disciplines we need to exercise to keep our personal brands alive. As she says, with no events and all of us working from home, it's easy to be out of sight and out of mind. The 3 things she suggests are, firstly, get comfortable with video. Yes, folks, we may all be Zoom fatigued, but it's our first impression. The second is something she calls compassionate networking. Consider who in your network might be useful to someone else and make those connections. She encourages us to stop selling, be helpful, and provide that human interaction we're all deprived of when we're working from home. Sounds like a great tip. The third is to practice what she calls intentional positive interaction, which with all that 2020 has served us so far, we might find personally very difficult. But you don't want to be remembered for being negative. In particular, Jane suggests investing some time in LinkedIn, spreading the positivity with comments and likes. As usual, it's a wonderful read from Jane, and I encourage you to check it out. I'll include a link to it and the blog post from Mark in the show notes, which you can find at rockstarcmo.com/podcast. As you may remember from last week, Phil Lewis is the MD, founder and principal at Corporate Punk, described as a management consultancy that isn't. He's a regular contributor to Forbes, sharing his opinions and experience on leadership and specifically how to lead businesses that can thrive in a world of endless change. Sound familiar? We started a conversation last week about why CMOs don't make CEO, which we continue here. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Welcome back to Rockstar CMO FM, Phil. Hopefully people have listened to the last episode, but just a quick summary of who you are.
So, I run a business called Corporate Punk. We help organizations get the change that they need up and running in a very short period of time. And we do that through a blend of coaching, consulting, and training. And we tend to work both with marketeers, but also just across different leadership disciplines, different types of organizations, in order that they get really, really good at driving their own internal transformation.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed our conversation, and I asked you to come back on, or at least split our conversation up into two, because last time it was fascinating. We were talking about why CMOs don't become CEOs, and we'd covered a couple of points. Can you remind us what those points were from the last episode?
Yeah, I was talking to you about the fact that marketing is still regrettably regarded as a second-order discipline, lags behind disciplines like sales and ops and finance in many organizations, and how a lack of, work, particularly on really good quality data and business information, is feeding into that. And the second thing we were talking about, which is where we left off, was the idea that marketers by nature tend to focus more on external customers rather than internal customers, and whereas a lot of CEOs are much more practiced at managing those different constituencies, those internal customers, but also, when I mean internal customers, I'm people like investors and other stakeholders and employee cohorts and that kind of stuff. They tend to be a lot more practiced at that than a lot of marketeers are in the course of their day-to-day work. So those are just two things to think about, but there are, as you've already alluded to, Ian, more.
Yeah, and we initially at the beginning of the discussion, and I think there's probably more than four, but we'd said that we were going to talk about four. So what's the third on your list?
I think in order to talk about the third, it actually does lead on from the second. So it'd definitely be worth, if people haven't heard the first episode, going back and having a bit of a listen to that. But I just want to pull it up a little bit for a moment and go, right, what is it that business success in the 21st century actually requires? So the HBR in, I think, 2014 produced an extremely useful article. Not always a given for the HBR, by the way, which can, I think, be Ministry of the Bleeding Obvious for £14 an edition. But this particular article was very good. And it talks about 3 rules for making a company truly great. And the first 2 rules were, you need to compete on differentiators other than price. And the second rule was you need to prioritize increasing revenues over decreasing cost. And the third rule was there are no rules other than the first 2. So,
Right.
So if you think about that, you think about competing on differentiators other than price and prioritizing increasing revenues over decreasing cost, what you actually quite quickly come to the conclusion on is that it is an organization's ability to be creative, if you will, to be innovative, to be able to, create and ship new ideas to market quickly, and to be able to get to market intelligently, get to market in a way which is different to the competition, be market makers, create, and drive significant demand around those new innovations. Those are the things that help companies get and stay ahead. Now, that should feel intuitively true to us all, right? If we think about the companies that we admire, yes. We can talk about Google, we can talk about Apple, we can talk about Nike. By the way, in all of our working sessions with clients, we have the Google, Apple, Nike ban. If we ask you for examples of people who do things well, you can't say any of those 3 organizations. But if you talk about those 3, you would go, right, look, those are all organizations that do what I've just described incredibly well, right? And they tend not to worry about what the competition is doing. They tend to drive demand around their own services. They're innovative organizations that ship products quickly. They know how to create constituencies of consumers that buy those products, and so on. The reason I say this is because if you think about that, you would quite quickly come to the conclusion that in turn, that marketing is perhaps central to 21st century business success, and the skills and experience that fuel marketing, which is to say creativity, ingenuity, problem solving, what have you, those are, the critical skills that need to be institutionalized in organizations that are looking to be prosperous in today's market. So there are these natural abilities that marketeers have to be, creative and innovative, and to think quite radically about what needs to happen, working out how to test, learn, get things to market quickly, all that sort of stuff. What I'm saying is, remember where we started saying it was a second order discipline? This is a
Yes.
nonsense. If you actually come back to what's driving 21st century success at the level of the core competencies and at the level of the discipline that marketing is itself, marketing is actually central to business success, and the things that
Yeah.
the behaviors and the attributes that underpin marketing are central to business success. So a firm's ability to outthink and out-innovate its competition is
Yeah.
actually about imagination. It's about how do you at scale, create ingenious solutions and roll that out on a day-to-day basis. That's a team game. Now, marketers have got loads of value to add in that context, Ian, as I've just kind of talked to.
Yeah.
But rarely do they understand how to institutionalize their creative thinking, institutionalize their problem solving, and actually make that an organization-wide enterprise, right? So organizational change, right? The kind of organizational change that we teach and we help organizations to deliver is all about how do you become more creative, more innovative, more agile, more resilient, more responsive to what's going on in your market. Often it's the marketeers that innately have an understanding that that's what needs to happen, but they're kind of landlocked, right? But what I'm saying is that they landlock themselves because what they're not doing is working out how the things that they know how to do have a broader application in their organization. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, but I think there's a push-pull there, isn't there? In that is it hard for marketers to assert themselves into the business in order to bring their discipline to that business? Do they need to be invited? Is it a lack of CEOs understanding, I have this creativity in my business and it's in the marketing department?
I think it's a bit of both. Now, do I think that there are marketeers out there that are, awaiting permission rather than seeking forgiveness? Absolutely. My overall observation, though, is, a lot of businesses that we work with are quite myopic. That the job of the business after a certain time is to keep the business running, right? And therefore, what that does is it puts everyone in the weeds. Yeah. It puts everybody in the place of what do we just need to do to manage the day to day, and then roles get locked around that, right? So we have an ops person, we have an HR person, we have a marketeer, we have and so it goes and so it goes.
Yeah.
And then what isn't really happening is a conscious conversation at a leadership level about what does our organization actually need.
Yeah.
What skills, what talents, what capabilities does it need? What culture does it need? What types of systems, processes, structures does it need in order to be able to continue to flourish? That conversation doesn't happen. If it does happen, it happens on an occasional away day. Or what more commonly happens is that something hits the skids, right? So something goes horribly wrong, and that could be that could be anything from a product launch right through to share price crash, right through to, a slow kind of, reduction in sales, whatever it looks like. There's problems
or
that
a pandemic.
or indeed a pandemic. It's a great point, actually, and I want to come back to that. There's, what happens is stuff happens, and then people go, "Oh, we seem to be built and running the wrong organization." Right. So then what you do is you go to a management consultancy who charges you £1 million for some PowerPoint about how to sort it out because they don't understand innovation. Or what happens is you go on some leadership, coaching courses that are great, but a bit like trickle down economics, to never reach the parts of the organization they're supposed to reach quickly enough, or whatever. Actually, the reality is, as you were kind of saying, the reality is that some of the core competencies that people already working in the organization, like marketeers, have, just don't get leveraged, right? So then you want to go, and so one subset of that conversation then is, what kind of leadership does this business need going forward? Well, the kind of leadership any business needs, in my view, is leadership that are going to build organizational qualities like being responsive, being resilient, being innovative, right? Marketeers should be, theoretically, at the front of the pack on that. But again, because they don't institutionalize, it's really, really hard for them to be so.
Right. And I had this vision of the company being formed and everybody jumping on their hamster wheels to get the thing done that it's for, and nobody stops and thinks.
Well,
and
but this
until
is it,
something
right?
happens, like you're saying, yeah,
But this is
yeah,
it. I mean, look, the coronavirus thing is fascinating
yeah,
because, and I do talk about this, and I don't want to sound glibly dismissive of the sort of, the both the health and social sort of challenges that have come
yeah,
off it, but at a business level,
yeah,
what the coronavirus pandemic, I believe, has done is just shone a really harsh and unforgiving light on
mm,
how most businesses are actually run. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're in travel or entertainment or hospitality or whatever, this is probably a once in a generation event
yeah,
and could not have been predicted. But there's been loads of other categories that
mm,
aren't theoretically
mm,
affected or affected in the same way. Where actually what you're seeing is that organizational capability, just the capabilities I was talking about earlier of being responsive,
mm,
resilient, innovative, just aren't particularly well evolved. So, but when you do see them, it's really exciting. So I'll give you an example of this. Um, in the crisis, take fast food, massively hit because commuter volumes obviously down. If you look at, your
yeah,
Wagamama's and your Pratts, the
yeah,
likes of Pret and Pure shut up shop because it was actually effectively more financially beneficial for them to do so, put
yeah,
their people on furlough, get their business rate rebates, all the rest of it.
yeah,
Leon, the fast food operator, very quickly mobilized around two new propositions. Within 3 weeks, it had a direct to consumer delivery business called Feed Britain up and running, and it
mhm,
had the Feed NHS campaign that Matt Lucas's Thank You Baked Potato, that we're
yeah,
all familiar with, came off within 3 weeks. Because at
yeah,
a cultural level, that ability to be responsive, resilient, and innovative
yeah,
is really, really embedded. Now, the CEO of that organization also happens to be a brilliant marketeer, right?
right,
He
right,
happens to have a deep and intuitive understanding of brand. He happens to have a deep understanding of what it is, consumers are looking for.
yeah,
Um, and he happens to be able also to build value propositions against that and deploy them very, very quickly and effectively. All of
yeah,
those marketing skills became very, very useful when a pandemic hit. But the fact that they've been institutionalized was one of the things that future proofed that organization in that context. So
yeah,
anybody that doesn't think the kind of skills that underpin marketing are important should look at the pandemic and should look at what happened in categories like fast food and should compare and contrast the behavior of Leon to the behavior of other organizations that simply shut up shop and are going to have a harder time recovering.
I love that. I love that example. That's really cool. So that was our third point, right? So what did you have next in our list of why CMOs don't become CEOs?
Um, I want to just talk about leadership development and training.
Mm-hmm.
So it sort of seems to me, and this, by the way, isn't just true of marketeers, it's also true of other disciplines. I think it's certainly true in HR. Where do you go to learn how to be a CEO, right?
Mm.
So I think that the Marketing Society, for example, does a pretty good job of doing fairly high level thought leadership for marketeers. You've got other, you've got the business press out there as well, pumping out stuff which, Campaign is a complete rag. There are other marketing publications. Well, I mean, it's just a magazine for self-regarders, isn't it? Really, but you've got other marketing publications that I think have done a slightly better job than that. But and you can read the business press, or you can go off. You can trot off to a business school. You can
Mm-hmm.
trot off to Holt Ashridge or whatever, or to
Mm-hmm.
Harvard, or one of the real blue chip establishments. I mean, Holt Ashridge itself, of course. Now the problem with that, I think, a lot of the time is that. So if you look at it, you've got two sort of sources of insight and information for you there. One is kind of is the really high end of marketing, but a lot of conversations that are happening in marketing society and in the press and all the rest of it around marketing are about marketing. They're not about broader skills development for
Yeah.
marketeers. So that's kind of like a non-starter. And the business schools, the problem that I would have with the business schools is that it's a lot of theory, it's not a lot of practice, is the first problem. And the second problem is that they tend to teach technical skills, not human skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's just examine that. Theory, not practice. You could go on a course about organizational design, say, or you could go on a course about innovation, you will possibly get an academic teaching you who's very, very knowledgeable in his or her field, but hasn't actually done it in
Yeah.
the world, right? Is problem number
Yeah.
one. And problem number two is, to drive change or to do the kind of jobs of becoming an influence that I talked about, and to institutionalize and scale those organizational behaviors, which go to systems, structures, culture, all that kind of thing, to institutionalize those. They aren't just about understanding great, theory and understanding technically what you need to do in the organization in order to be able to drive that. They also are about people management. How do you lead and manage and influence people so that you are, in a position, Ian, where you can bring everybody with you on that journey, and you get into all those kind of corporate cliches around alignment and buy-in and all that sort of thing. But organizations are deeply resistant to changing. So again, building technical competencies isn't enough. You've also got to build, competencies around how do you lead and manage those complicated stakeholder groups that I talked about previously as well. So a lack of so there's just this kind of gap in the marketplace for that stuff. There's a gap in the market for something which is a bit more grounded and a bit less theoretical, and something that blends both those technical and human skills together. So just before we talk more about that, I just want to say, if you bring those points together, if you go, marketing is a second order discipline, it's not talking the language of the board, it's not it's too focused on external customers, not focused on internal ones. And it's really missing the job of actually connecting its core skills to the needs of those internal customers. And on top of all that, there ain't any way of traditionally of learning all that stuff. There's nowhere to go where you can learn some of those skills and practice some of those skills. I'm not saying it's a comprehensive overview of why CMOs don't make CEO, but in amongst all that, there's a fair few contributory factors that we've identified over the course of the 35-minute conversation, or however long we've been going. Do you see what I mean? So it's like, I suppose what I'm saying is it's not just as simple as they don't talk the language of the board. It goes to professional development, it goes to education, it goes to internal, not external customers, and it goes to a knowledge gap around what 21st century businesses actually need.
So that last point that you're making about education, now marketers ding each other about marketing education. There's a big debate, inspired by folks like Mark Ritson, about the fact that, we're not serious enough about our own discipline, about the fact that we should all have marketing accreditation and marketing degrees before we're allowed to espouse any of this stuff. Is this about credibility? Are you looking for marketers to get this education so that they can then have that conversation with the board and with the CEOs and stuff like that? Is that what this education thing's about, or do you genuinely think that those skills are lacking amongst CMOs, or is it about proving they have those skills?
No, I think. Look, I think first the point you just made is well made, or the point you alluded to, which is if you don't take yourself seriously, how's anybody going to take you seriously? And I think that's a kind of I think we can all just let that one sit there for a bit. But I think. What am I passionate about? Look, I have no dog in the fight where marketing is concerned, let me be honest. I'm not more passionate about the prosperity of marketeers than I am about the prosperity of any capable professional in any field. And where we started this conversation is, I was saying to you, my job is, as I see it, is help organizations be their natural, brilliant, imperfect human best and allow the talent, energy, and passion to come to the surface. What I am passionate about, deeply passionate about, is that in order to prosper in the 21st century, organizations need to focus on building structures, processes, cultures that are resilient, responsive, and innovative, right? There's ample evidence out there that those are the businesses that survive and thrive. They survive not just through pandemics, they survive through all sorts of ups and downs in the world. And anybody that thinks the pandemic, you kind of go, in the last 20 years, we've had 9/11, we've had the credit crunch, we've had the pandemic, we've had Brexit, we've had fires, floods, Fukushima, we've had sovereign debt crises, we've had you name it. So you go, the job of being responsive, resilient, and innovative is the thing that we need to worry about in terms of, are we building organizations with that capability? All I am saying is that marketeers have skills, beliefs, attributes that are really useful in that context, where they tend to lack, in my view, knowledge and experience, is how to surface those and connect those into the wider organization in a way that helps the organization become more responsive, resilient, and innovative. And that in doing that, they hamper their own career development prospects. That's the core of what I'm saying.
I love it. I love it, and it's like a call to action. That's wonderful. Now, to move on from that specific question, I know that you've got a number of programs that you run with your clients, and something you've recently launched that addresses some of this.
Yeah, I mean, we're a coaching and consulting and training organization, and I think that the value is in the blend of those things. Sometimes what you need to be able to do with clients is work with them at the level of systems and processes and structures, which is where consulting comes in. And only ever do that through the lens of people, right? You shouldn't do that in the abstract like the management consultants do, treat people like robots. You want to have a very human approach to doing that stuff, but that's where consulting comes in.
Resources, I think they're called, aren't they?
Resources, God, you love that. The second one is, the coaching side of it is really about the emotional journey of leadership and making sure that you're ready for that journey. And then the third side of it's training, which is the injection of new tools and techniques. And for me, it's the overlap between those things that's always powerful. And we blend those things together with a lot of clients. But we have recently just launched a signature training and leadership development proposition called the Change Course. And it was developed partly off some of the insights that we've talked about in this conversation, Ian. So I personally believe that we need to try and find forms of exec training and leadership development that are more grounded than most of what's available out there, that actually help people not only to prosper in their own discipline, but also help them to create, lead, and manage change within the wider organization. And also that they combine both the technical and the human skills that you need in order to manage change and develop that kind of responsiveness, resilience, and innovation potential I was talking about earlier on. So the Change Course is a 6-month-long program. It's designed for people at the level of, in this conversation, marketing director or CMO. It's not designed for people who are more junior than that. Although it won't just be marketeers on there, which I think is to its benefit. Actually, it's multidisciplinary. Right. It's done in modules. So 2 modules. 3 modules. Sorry. The first is about strategy. The second is about organizational readiness. The third is about people. Each module there is a combination of half-day teaching days. There's basically 3 half days per module, complemented by, and this I think is critical, discussion forums, which are effectively forums for professional and peer-to-peer coaching to take place for participants, so they have a chance to process what they've learned in the teaching sessions and actually work out its practical application and talk about how they turn it from theory into practice. All of that then, as I say, it takes place over 6 months, and we're keeping the cohort sizes very small. So it's only going to be 10 to 12 people that go through each cycle of the course. For larger organizations, we've also developed a way of doing this that can be brought into the organization. So if a number of senior people in the organization want or need to go through it at once, then that's an option available as well. Right. And the reason to do it was because in the end, I think, I'm a great fan of, if you see something consultants tend to be very good at is spotting when things are broken and complaining about it. When I spot something that's broken, me and the team tend to go, well, what can our contribution be to fixing it? So we've also designed something here. We're not doing any of that, bullshit around discounts and early birds and platinum packages and all the nonsense that goes with it. We've priced this to be very, very competitive. It's a lot lower price than you'd pay for something equivalent at the business school. We're doing it actually part as, of course, it benefits our business. But this is something we wanted to do because we really, really wanted to do it, because we consider it to be a gap in, a serious gap in professional development that's out there in the market. We felt we had a contribution to make it. And the final thing to say is, I don't profess it's going to deal with absolutely every issue that we've talked about here. But if you don't come out of that 6-month process fantastically well equipped with practical tools, techniques, and ways of thinking about the world that genuinely help improve your organizational influence and improve your organizational behavior through the lens of responsiveness, resilience, and innovation, I would be stunned. I mean, these are things that we've used with clients for years, and they've had an absolutely outstanding success. So this the IP that fuels this is proven.
Yeah, well, I think having spoken to you, we've been talking for almost an hour, I suppose, over the 2 episodes. I think the value is clearly going to be there with working with your organisation. So just remind us where people would find that course, where they'd find you, and where they'd find your organisation.
Go to corporatepunk.com. If you look on the menu, change courses there, or on the services page, you'll be able to see it there. We're also on Twitter at Corporate Punk. I'm at Phil Lewis HQ. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. Not that hard to find anybody on the internet, as they always say.
That's true. Well, it's a pleasure, Phil. Thank you very much for joining us on Rockstar CMO FM, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you, and take care.
Cheers, Phil. Thank you, Phil. I really enjoyed that conversation, and I hope you did too. I will, of course, include all the links we discussed in the show notes, and I encourage you to check out the Corporate Punk website. Very, very different. Right, it's Friday evening here at the Rockstar CMO Penthouse in London. I'm about ready to call it a day and ease my way into the weekend with a trip to the Rockstar CMO virtual bar and join my friend and content marketing guru, Robert Rose, for a cocktail. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend. It's funny. It feels a deja vu, like we do this every week or something.
Yeah, but we had a lot of Guinnesses last week, so that might be why you don't remember.
I see. I see. Well, I've got an interesting one here. What we're drinking tonight is, I'm calling it the Max Zoom, because it's a state that I've achieved over the last week or so. Which is, I'm actually, longing for, quite frankly, 3 hours in a taupe conference room to be actually with real people. I'm just reached Max Zoom. But anyway, the drink itself is a wonderful reposado tequila mixed with green apple juice and a splash of lemon. Pretty simple drink, actually.
That sounds simple. Now, if there's one thing we've learned over the last few weeks, I can do simple. So let me see. You'll be excited this time because I've changed the drink that I have in front of me. It's actually Bombay Sapphire gin.
Bombay Sapphire, yes. Well, that's close enough to tequila. I think you can probably get away with it. Yeah.
And do we put ice in this one?
You do indeed.
Nice.
So you get that in too, I see. Yeah.
Let me just get some ice in there, and put the gin in. And then what do you say? Apple juice.
Yeah, green apple juice to be specific. Yeah.
Okay, let me see what I got here. This is tonic.
Okay, right. I see. Yes, almost like green apple juice, but
I think so. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things in tonic, isn't there? Could it be apples?
There is. There's the tonic. I think is in tonic.
Let me give this a try.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very nice, Robert. As usual, you've excelled yourself with your mixology. A wonderful drink, and I think we could drink a few of these. What did you say it was called?
That's called the Max Zoom.
Basically
named after the state that I have now found myself in. Yes.
All right. Now I'm hoping that we're not going to be drinking these on Zoom, are we? Are we going somewhere nice this week?
We're going somewhere really nice.
Nice.
As we record this, it is, in Fahrenheit, because of course I'm an American. So for silly imperial measurements here, but we have the over 100 degrees, 104 degrees for the last 5 days here. It has been absolutely hot. So we're going to be drinking this in a place where it is not the middle of summer. We're going to go down to Melbourne, Australia for this, one of my favorite cities. on the planet. I love Melbourne. And of course, it is winter there, or becoming winter, and it is a balmy 50, half the temperature here in California. So it'll be a lovely way to spend a cool day.
All right, and where are we? Are we in a particular bar? Are we sitting outside watching the sea?
I think we're outside. I mean, I actually checked the weather before we started recording, and it's raining this week there. So hopefully, though, as it clears up toward the end of the week, we could go sit outside, because it would just be. It's a beautiful city to sit at. In many ways, Melbourne reminds me of San Francisco.
Yeah.
And so it's just on a beautiful day. It's hard to beat just sitting out in one of the parks, looking over the water, and having a nice cocktail.
That sounds fantastic. Now, as an Englishman, that sounds like a typical summer's day to me. So I wouldn't recognize it as being winter, but that sounds
right. Well, yes, indeed.
That sounds fantastic. And as we're chilling out in Melbourne, what's the one thought you're going to give us this week about marketing?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about, just in the spirit of the drink, of reaching max Zoom. I'm going to talk a little bit about virtual events. This is what been on my mind lately. And I think here we are in, August of 2020, and so many of us have started to either hold virtual events, attend virtual events, or both.
Yep.
And I think, I think we're going to have to come to a reckoning on this, because as I look to virtual events in the short term, if we don't somehow start to break the pattern here, I think we really are going to get fatigued on this, and they're just events in general are going to become less interesting and less productive and less viable as a marketing model. And I think if we don't really start to rethink how we push the medium forward, the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, I think could see a real decline in the effectiveness of online events. We just got to figure this out, and it's not something I have a pat answer to right now, but I'm truly reaching a point where we've got to rethink this.
Is this a bit like the normal statement that this is why marketers aren't trusted with nice things, shouldn't be given nice things? Is it now we've been given Zoom accounts, all of us can now create these virtual events and we're overdoing it? Or is it the fact you can't quite recapture, a real event with a virtual event, and therefore, we're spoiling the event content channel, if you like? I don't know if that's the right way of putting it.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think we have seen it. Somebody made a great comment the other day where they talked about the idea of texting versus voice calls, right?
Yeah.
And they said, if texting had come first, it would have gone away, right? Because once voice calls came into being and sort of if it had replaced texting, we would have said to ourselves, wow, what are we doing, right? Typing our messages into... Why aren't we just calling people and having seamless voice conversations? And so this reminds me of kind of what has happened with virtual events. We've been thrown into this very suboptimal format, and we just don't know how to take advantage of it yet. And so what most businesses have done is seen virtual events as suboptimal to physical events, and basically said, well, it should be cheaper, it should be more efficient, it should be, it should basically be the easiest way possible. And as consumers of that, we have bought into that too. We have bought into the idea that virtual isn't as good. And so what we've done is we've basically reduced the value of virtual events, and thus basically looked at them as suboptimal and as some kind of placeholder in many ways. And as they become, by sort of need, not placeholders, becoming a permanent fixture in what it is we do, we haven't figured out, either in the consumption or the creation part, how to take the medium to another level.
Right. And making it worth whatever the cost would be for a physical event. We've actually cheapened it, not just cheapened it from a cost perspective, but from a production values perspective, from an everything perspective. So therefore the consumer's getting a worse product.
That's right. Right. When you see it done correctly, right? When you see it done well, where the event is being, the medium is being pushed in creative ways. And the two things that come leaping to mind are, sort of Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, how they handled that. And just recently, literally this week, as I've been watching the Democrats here hold their national convention, how they've been formatting their event. That to me feels more like what a virtual event should feel and look like.
Right.
It's compelling. There's good production value. It feels a little more like television or like something you want to sit and lean back and watch rather than something that you have to sort of strain to see the Zoom with the gray background of somebody's bedroom. And, that's the future of the medium. But even that's the short-term future, right? It's not how we might start to integrate things like interactivity and what the medium can actually do. It feels very much to me like the early days of the web when we had, blinking GIFs on the homepage.
Just because we could.
Yeah, because we could, right?
Yeah.
Remember the autoplay, we used to, like in 1998, we had the autoplay audio on our websites where you would come to the page and it would be like, welcome to .com.
Well, I think it was on your show, you interviewed somebody once that talked about what if webinars and Netflix had a baby about virtual events. Do you think there's a play? Do you think that the problem with events, and I know that you've just done an event, and I don't mean to be critical, but do you think that the time box element of the event, the fact that you have to show up at a certain time, is actually going against really the way that we're consuming any kind of content and media right now? That really we're in a sort of a Netflix binge watching culture, and that events perhaps need to change and adapt to that and still be premium?
It's a great question, my friend, because, you start thinking about what business conferences really are. And that is part of rethinking. It's not just rethinking the packaging, it's rethinking the product full stop, right?
Yeah.
So what is a business conference? Is it a collection of teaching events, a collection of deconstructing strategies so that you learn something? Or is truly, if you peel back all the layers and the job done sort of to get to what a business conference really is it more of a FOMO type, networking event? Study after study shows that people go to business conferences for the networking, right? They go for the meeting other people. You don't do that in virtual events right now. No. And so, the idea of the experience of seeing other people, networking with other people, having dinner, going to parties, going and seeing a band together, having a fun break, sitting in a hotel, going to the hotel bar. That's really the business conference. The content in many ways is simply the sideshow.
Yeah. And I remember, I don't know if you remember, I don't know if the Gilbane events still happen, but I don't know if you remember those from way back when they were quite popular amongst the web content management crowd. And I remember being on Twitter at the beginning, and I think it was about 2008, 2009 or something like that. And I started following all these CMS people and started to engage with them. And back when Twitter was friendly, I don't know if you remember when Twitter was actually quite friendly. And and I walked into the bar at Copley in Boston, I think it was, the usual place. And there was Twitter come to life. There were all these people, and I was looking at my tweet feed. Oh, look, there's this guy, and that's the joy of, that's the interaction, isn't it, between the virtual and the real life? That's what you want, isn't it? You want to walk into a bar where you meet all your Twitter friends, and it starts off like that. How do you do that with a virtual event?
I don't know that you can at the moment, but that's and it's not just a creation problem, right? Because you can set up networking rooms, and you can set up the places where, in Brady Bunch style, you see everybody's face, and you can have a conversation or a chat or something like that. But it's not just that we're bad at creating it; we're bad at consuming it. We don't know how to we don't know how to behave on the consumption level either. And it may not be, and this is the question where I don't really have any answers. It may not be solvable in a virtual event, right? It may just, networking at a virtual event may literally be, where the sort of what voice phone calls are now, right? Which are, no kids these days don't use their phone as a phone. They never talk to anybody on the phone. They only text or use apps. So it is literally just a computer that they have. And networking at virtual events may end up being like that. It's just something that can't be done. And so the product, getting to your earlier point, the product itself may need to change, right? It may need to become, virtual conferences may need to become more like a documentary or a true teaching event that you consume on your own time, rather than something that is meant to be build up excitement and and build up networking and liveliness and a live audience and all that kind of stuff. It's very very interesting.
I think so. And it's like the only thing left, isn't it, is live sports, where anybody's going to actually congregate at the same time and consume the same thing at once. I have seen a little bit of with lockdown. I've seen a little bit of my own kids talking more on FaceTime and all that kind of stuff with their chums. So I think there's an answer here somewhere. I'm just not sure where it is, but it's a great thought, and particularly as you've just done Content Tech Summit last week. How did it go?
It went great.
Yeah.
I mean, it went as good as it possibly could have, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was, we had a wonderful set of speakers. We had a wonderful set of thought leaders come in and conduct workshops, and we had by all accounts, the attendees really enjoyed it. So, I mean, it went well. I think in the scheme of life, we're putting on events as good as they can be put on. So
yeah, well, that's good. I'm glad you had a good event, and I got to admit I missed it, but I saw a lot of of what people were saying on Twitter and stuff, and I understand that it went really well. So congratulations on that, and thank you very much for your thought for this week and for this lovely cocktail. It's delicious. And if people don't know you already, Robert, where will they find you when they spin the dial on the interwebs?
Well, you're very kind. I think the best place for me is probably the website, which of course is contentadvisory.net. That's
splendid. Well, thank you, Robert. And will I see you next week?
Absolutely.
All right. I look forward to it. Cheers. Thank you, Robert. As we mentioned, you can find Robert at contentadvisory.net. And I'd also recommend tuning into his podcast, all of which I will include in the links in the show notes. You can find those at rockstarcmo.com/podcast. That's a wrap on episode 24 of the Rockstar CMO Effing Marketing Podcast. And thank you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. Thanks again to the corporate punk Phil Lewis, to Robert Rose, Jane Scandura, and to our Rockstar CMO contributing community who make our little monthly publication what it is. But most of all, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you like my guests, please give them a mention, click their links, follow them, and take a look at their work. I really appreciate their time, so please show them some love. If you like the show, would like to help answer the question of whether the world needs another effing marketing podcast, drop us some feedback or a review, subscribe, share, or just listen. I'm glad you're here. Next week, I'm hoping to chat to the CMO of Recorded Future, Tom Wentworth, about a digital publication they've just launched called The Recorded. But until then, I've been your host, Ian Truscott, founding editor of RockstarCMO.com, and I hope you'll join us again next week here at Rockstar CMO FM.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, Tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the Boys Club of Advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.